Hello and a very warm welcome. The coronavirus pandemic has upended the world of education forever. Learning in schools and colleges will be very different in the after corona era from the times that we grew up in. To reflect deeply on the changes that are upon us and how learning in the future will change, we have assembled a world-class panel of some of the top academics and pioneers in the education technology space. I am delighted to introduce to you our panelists for this India Today brainstorm on the future of education. I want to start by introducing the academics first. I'll start with Professor Anant Agarwal. He's a distinguished professor at MIT, founder and chief executive of the education technology startup edX. He's a serial entrepreneur and professor of electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. My next guest is Professor Srikant Datar. He's a professor of thinking and innovation and accounting at the Harvard Business School. He's the faculty chair of the Harvard Innovation Laboratory and has written an acclaimed book on the future of the MBA program. And I'm very keen on understanding from him how he sees that change in the post-pandemic era. Our next guest is the man who virtually created online education globally. Sal Khan is the renowned founder of the Khan Academy. He's live with us from Mountain View in California. Khan Academy, as all of us know, is a non-profit online education academy, and Sal has spent his entire life researching and developing online education modules. I'm delighted to introduce also the most famous face of online education in India, Byju Raveendran, the founder of Byju's. He's a very familiar face on television and is really seeing what's happening in the EdTech space in India. With us from Oxford in the United Kingdom is Dr. Elizabeth Kish, founder of the Rhodes Trust at the University of Oxford. The Rhodes Trust has for over a century been a global pioneer in postgraduate education. So thank you to this very distinguished panel for joining us for this very important conversation. I want to start by understanding what's happening at this moment during the pandemic. Now that, and there's some data which suggests that at this time in 186 countries, 1.2 billion children are disrupted, and they're having to, in various ways, move away from the education model that they were used to. So let me go across to Sal Khan first of the Khan Academy. Online education was gaining ground in any case, but I'd like you to set up this conversation by explaining what you think is happening at this moment and which of those changes you see carry forward into the after Corona era as well. Sal, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Well, the very clear thing, as you mentioned, 1.2 billion, I've seen numbers as high as 1.5, 1.6 billion students who otherwise would be in school are no longer in school. And all of this happened very, very quickly. In most countries, it happened with 3 or 4 days notice. And so you can imagine in most of the world, the school districts, the ministries of education haven't really had a chance to plan. And even when there is some planning, they have very serious issues to deal with. Obviously, online learning is a big piece of this. We at Khan Academy have seen our traffic be 3x plus of what it typically is. We've been seeing registrations at 20x. But in order to access the things that we produce and what several of the panelists produce, you need online access. And even in fairly wealthy countries like the US, we're seeing sometimes 20, 30% of students don't have access to it. And you can imagine in other parts of the world, in places like India, it's even a higher percentage of students. So these school districts have to think about, how do we get internet access? How do we get devices to students? And then there's other things that schools provide, oftentimes meals and other types of supports. And then once they get that out of the way, then they have to think about how do they virtualize. And that's why we've been trying to create supports for teachers and parents and students around the world. This is what your schedule could look like. Here are free resources that you can find on the internet to make sense of that. This is what a learning plan could look like over the next few months and through the summer. And then we're going to have a situation as we get back to school in the fall in the Northern Hemisphere, where some students will have learned over these 2 to 6 months and other students will not have learned. And so every year you have a disparity, you have a variance in students showing up, and this year it's going to be even more. And so even when schools open, I think teachers are going to need to leverage some online tools in order to address that variance in students' preparedness.
Professor Srikant Datar, how is the Harvard Business School dealing with this massive disruption? The whole idea of coming to a prestigious institute like HBS is to be on campus, to be in a peer group, to learn from your peers, apart from the faculty whom you meet in person, and that leads to so many wonderful moments and exchanges. Suddenly all of that disrupted, and a lot of people would wonder, is this the way it's going to stay? How are you dealing with these changes, and which of those do you see carry forward, Professor Datar?
First, Rahul, thank you very much for having me, and what a pleasure to be on this panel with such distinguished people. Just an honor, really, and a privilege. It disrupted us, just as Sal said, for the school system very quickly and very sharply at the business school as well. For reasons that you described, we were always in the case method, teaching in our amphitheater, teaching by the case method, and suddenly 125 faculty had to go online and teach online at a distance. We still wanted to retain as many features of the transformational learning experience that we believe in and deliver at the Harvard Business School. And so this meant creating new categories. For instance, we created online learning facilitators. It meant that faculty and this online learning facilitator had to work together in order to deliver the program. Fortunately for us, we did not have some of the issues that Sal was talking about, which are extremely serious issues around connectivity. We did have a little with students in different countries. But again, the technology stood up very well. We tried to make sure that the learning continued in the same way. But because it was done very quickly, we more or less took what we do in the classroom and tried to deliver that online. I think going forward, and I'm sure we'll get into this later in your discussion, we will change. I think we will try and incorporate many elements of asynchronous learning, synchronous learning, case method, field method in what we do. I don't believe that management education will be the same post-COVID. And much as this crisis has been such a sad set of circumstances, out of it, I think will come some truly interesting innovations. But I'm sure we'll get into that later.
Dr. Elizabeth Kish, if we were to shift continents and come to the United Kingdom, how has the University of Oxford, and in particular the Rhodes Trust, adapted to these changes? What are the kind of changes that you're noticing at this time, and how do you think this could shape the future of education going forward?
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me. I'm very honored to be a part of this panel. As the other panelists have said, this is a combination of adapting on the fly and also trying to find ways of sustaining community and sustaining that connectivity between students and their faculty and advisors and mentors. So at the Rhodes Trust, we select 100 Rhodes Scholars every year, including 5 from India. We're very proud of that. And so we have about 300 scholars typically in residence. Of them, half approximately stayed in Oxford. So we have been working to connect with both the ones who are scattered all over the world and the ones who are in Oxford. The university has taken examinations online, has moved courses online very quickly, quite remarkably, really, for such an ancient university to move so quickly. But now we're also seeing, this creative effort to figure out ways in which, for instance, in our case, we're trying to move the character service leadership program that we offer our scholars, which is really at the heart of the Rhodes Scholar experience, is that they're coming together from all over the world. They're studying every single subject that's offered by the university, but they also come together to talk about values and how they're going to lead in the world. So we're having to take those retreats, which are typically very much residential, and move them online. And I think it will lead us to see the value more of that kind of virtual community building. I don't think it can ever replace in-person community, but it can be an incredible addition to it and a way of scaling and expanding it. And we're finding ways also to bring our alumni together through programming and virtual events in a way that we've never done before.
Byju Raveendran, you've made a lot of your programs available for free to students across the country. What are the kind of trends that you've noticed since the pandemic broke? How's it been at Byju's for you? Professor Anant Agarwal, can you explain what are the kind of changes you've noticed? You've been teaching in a class and now you're having to move those classes online. You'd already been doing a lot of that, teaching students across 100+ countries who came for some of your most popular online courses. To what extent are you thinking that students and teachers both are being able to adapt to this sudden change? Some of them were already preparing for it, moving in this direction. Some suddenly have to deal with it.
Before COVID-19 hit, only about 3% of students around the world were learning online. After COVID, suddenly we went to 100% of students in colleges or in schools learning online, learning remotely. The numbers are 1.3, 1.5 billion. But much closer to home, my own daughter, Anisha, is in the next room, and she is in her 3rd year at MIT doing computer science, and she's at home learning. So I'm seeing firsthand how students are dealing with online learning when they had not done much of it in their lives before. And so both the faculty members and the students, and frankly, all the people around the world are having a difficult time studying and working remotely at the same time. And people are trying to cope in various ways. We're trying to help them as well. On edX, we have launched a course almost at a war footing. In 2 weeks, we launched a course on how to learn online. So you can come to edx.org and there's a course. You can learn how to learn online in about 2 or 3 hours. We've also launched a course on how to teach online for faculty. There are many, many ways in which people can rapidly gear up, but it's not easy. There are different ways of how to do it. And frankly, people who are also working are having difficulty at home. How do you cope with all this time? How do you cope with working online? And not surprisingly, on edX.org, one of our most popular courses during this time is a course on happiness from Berkeley. If you Google edX happiness, you will come to that course, and interest in that course has skyrocketed. And overall in edX, we've seen traffic go up by a factor of 10 during this time. We're also trying to help universities and colleges and many schools as well offer our programs and courses to their students because they don't have online content. We've launched edX Online Campus for free, where any university in the world, we have many in India as well, you can come to edX and for free, you can have your students sign up for our courses, including certificates, completely for free during this COVID duration. You go to edX.org, you'll see a banner. You can come in and you can join up and freely have all your students be learning online from the online content we have on edX.
Okay, Byju Raveendran, can you explain how's it been at Byju's? You've made a lot of your content available for free. What's the kind of uptake that you've seen after the pandemic broke and people were forcibly locked in?
Thank you, Rahul, for having me in this panel. Almost on the day when the lockdown started, we went free with almost all our content, and it's still continuing, both the asynchronous content as well as the scheduled sessions which we run on a daily basis. And what we have seen is almost 3x increase in terms of number of users, those who are trying out this model. Now, as a model, online learning, like as a complementary tool to what's happening inside school, we all knew that it's very beneficial, but right now, a huge behavioral shift is happening across all the stakeholders, not just among students. Now, if you think of teachers are learning fast and adapting fast to how to use the digital learning tools. Even some of them, those who were very hesitant in trying out before. Students, they were always the fast adapt because anything new, it's easy for them to kind of change because changing the way students learn is always easy. But more importantly, parents are, they have started accepting the fact that their kids can also learn from screens because one way or the other, a lot of parents are forced to do some kind of homeschooling, whether they like it or not. And they realize that kids are like in sometimes even binge watching these the movie-like videos or the game-like interactions which we have, not just we have, which most of the online learning tools have. So what I was trying to tell is, if it's done well, though this change in a way is happening in a forced manner, there's always a risk of, when you do things like this, where we use online learning as a crisis management tool, we run the risk of doing things very, like, for short-term benefits. But I hope that on the other side of the crisis, an evolved blended model where we combine the best of online learning and offline learning, because there are a lot of things which can only be done offline, and there are a lot of things which can always be done much better in an efficient manner if it's online. So what I really hope is, because every crisis presents us an opportunity, and I think that all of us, all stakeholders, whether it's teachers, students, parents, the policymakers, use this as an opportunity to create something which is innovative, far more efficient than what it was before. Though it all presents, as Sal Khan was talking about, the challenge of digital divide. Digital divide is always a challenge, but there are students without access to a device, but the inequities and disparities in the physical world are far bigger a hurdle to solve, where the two extremes are like, there is a minority who've got access to good teachers and good schools, and there's a large percentage of students where, forget about access to a good teacher, where they don't even have access to a teacher. So these challenges can be solved at scale only when we use technology as an enabler, and solving it at the infrastructure level by building schools and by having enough good teachers inside them in large population markets like India or most of the emerging markets. It's almost an impossible challenge. So I see this as, on the other side of the crisis, a new model.
So let's just spend a moment reflecting on learning outcomes in a classroom vis-a-vis learning outcomes online, because if you're highly driven and very motivated, you will stay engaged. But if you're used to procrastination, then there's a chance that you're not plugged in quite as carefully, and you don't have a professor standing right next to you, your peers to your left and right, to keep an eye on what you're doing. And how, therefore, Sal, can we look at ensuring that online learning outcomes are at par with those inside a class? How do we push towards that, Sal?
Good thing is, we've been seeing for many years that online learning can actually drive accelerated outcomes for students. What we've seen is the reason why many students have difficulty, especially in subjects like math. It has nothing to do with their ability. It has nothing to do with the difficulty of the subject. It's because they get pushed ahead at a fixed pace. And you get an 80% on a test in decimals, so you didn't know 20% of the material. The class then moves on to the next subject. Then you get a 70% on exponents. Then the class moves on to logarithms, expecting you to understand that. And then all of a sudden you get to an algebra class or a trigonometry class and nothing makes sense. And it's because you had all of those gaps. And so online learning, a teacher, it's very difficult, no matter how heroic their efforts. If you have 30, 35 students in a classroom, how do you address the needs of each individual student? That's where an online tool can be really useful. And we've been seeing fairly consistent studies. There have been 59 studies done on Khan Academy, where even 45 minutes a week are accelerating students' outcomes by 20-30%. The Nobel Prize in Economics that was out of MIT this past fall, their main finding, they did these randomized control studies, and they saw that especially poor children, the biggest intervention you could do is give them an opportunity to fill in their learning gaps. And once again, it's very hard for an individual teacher to do that with 30 students, but if that teacher is supported by online learning, we're seeing a lot of gains there. And so on the motivation, as was talked about by Byju just a little while ago, the ideal is a blend where these tools are used in a classroom. Then the teacher has more information, more data, the parents have it too, and then they can focus on the students who might be struggling, who might be demotivated. In this virtual world or this homeschooling world or this quarantine schooling world, whatever you want to call it, it is that much more difficult. A lot is going to fall much more on the student, and a lot more is going to fall on the parent. Now, the silver lining here is I think everyone is going to be building a muscle of more of that self-regulation, that agency, which frankly might be the most important skill of all. Yes, it's nice to know how to factor a quadratic, but it's even more important as we go into the 21st century to learn how to learn. Professor Agarwal's course, I'm intrigued by. It could be really useful, but this is forcing that habit on everyone. And one of the really interesting things, we've always had school closures. It's called summer vacation, and we've always had school closures during after school, and that actually has always been a source of inequity because middle-class families, upper middle-class families can afford tutors, they can afford summer programs, while the less affluent don't have those things. And so we're hoping that as people build the habits around online learning, they can see that there's resources out there, they're free, they're effective, and they go from pre-K all the way through the core of college, this notion of inequity around outside of school time is gone. And then we are seeing some really good work. We're trying to do as many supports of parents, teachers, and students as possible to keep them engaged. And we're seeing a lot of teachers and even parents self-organizing so that they can keep their students motivated to finish work.
Professor Srikant Datar, you wrote a book on the future of the MBA program. How do you see that change? Because a school, for example, like the Harvard Business School, is so much about the online, the in-person, in-class, on-campus experience. Now, suddenly you're online, your MBA students thinking of that as a bit of a cop-out because they've shelled out top dollar for that whole experience, and now it's moved online, and they're saying, hey, but if this is what it is, we could do something relatively similar on edX or Coursera. Why do I need to be at HBS? How many of these changes do you think are here to last? How are you thinking about the possible future of the MBA program, sir?
So let me respond three ways, Rahul. First, of course, business will change, and clearly, whether that is around what happens with respect to digitization. By the way, business models are working from home. Much of the data we see is productivity is actually up as a result of people working from home. Lots of things that we thought we couldn't do are now being able to be done at a distance virtually. So there'll be new business models, and clearly we'll have to take that into account as we begin to redesign the curriculum. I think at the basic level, what we wrote about in Rethinking the MBA, I think will stay. So just to quickly summarize, we argued that there were three important skills in a management education that needed to be developed. Knowing skills, facts, frameworks, and theories that make up the practice of management. Clearly, that has to continue, and we'll do more of it. I'll say a little bit about how in a minute. We argued about doing skills. So it's okay to know something, but what do you do with it? How do you actually build capabilities and techniques to practice the profession? And then we argued that being skills were very important. Values, attitudes, beliefs. How do you build purpose-driven organizations? As several of my fellow panelists have done here, amazing organizations that have been built, but it comes from passion. It comes from inspiring others to work with you. Management isn't an individual sport. So those were the three broad areas that we described. I don't think that will change. What will change, and of course there'll be more data analytics, and there'll be more AI and ML based programs and offerings. But what will change is how this is delivered. And I think it's very important not to do exactly what we would do in the classroom when you go online, for all the reasons that you were describing earlier, Rahul. So what we have tried to do, even in this experiment that we ran in this 2-week period that we went online, was use how do you keep students engaged? How do you, and of course, we've learned this from the online world that Anant and Byju and Sal and others have, of course, done over a long period of time. You don't do it in the same way. We've used breakout rooms where discussions then happen in smaller groups and people are pulled back. We use polls where people are constantly engaged in responding to questions that we are posing. We're using the chat function so that when someone is speaking, you can understand what their thought bubbles are in their head, which I don't really know in the regular classroom. When you're making a comment, I don't know what Sal or Byju or Elizabeth are thinking about it. But if they chatted to me about it, I can generate even more excitement and enthusiasm in the class. Yes, you do miss that contact. You do miss the human touch. You do miss the atmosphere, if you will. But there are a lot of things that I think we can do very well online. But then when it comes to the doing and being skills, and again, I can come back to this later, I think one can actually combine this blended form where you're learning in the classroom and outside the classroom in such powerful ways imagine a project being done across many geographies and someone's teaching marketing and you're trying to figure out how would that marketing program work across different countries. How can I take advantage of geographical dispersion and make that a real advantage in the classroom, which I cannot do when you're together? But when it comes to building leadership and building capabilities, again, you can do it online, but the human contact and human touch in terms of thinking about values and attitudes become so important that those I suspect we'll continue to do in person. So I see tremendous ways of doing this over time.
Byju Raveendran, let's focus for a moment about the reality of a lot of homes in countries like India. Small cramped spaces, lots of people, lots of distraction. Many don't even have access to proper laptops or iPads and weren't deeply into online education. Now suddenly this change has come and hit them. How are they adapting to the changes that are upon them, and what can be done to try and improve learning outcomes in some of the tier 2, tier 3 cities of India where people may not be fully used to the idea of online education before this?
Yeah, Rahul, we've always seen that the early adopters in this segment, not just from metros, because over the last 4 years with better penetration and close to 70% of the students having access to a smartphone, but we've seen this even in small towns where some offering like this is of lot more relevance because they are the ones who miss out on having access to where access is actually a bigger challenge. So we only have a challenge where with those students also are not having access to a device. But if you look at students, especially the next generation, those who are the digital natives, there's not much disparity between those who are in metros or in small towns because we always talk about parents being the first teachers. But today, a lot of these early learning, the skills, kids actually get them from YouTube itself. And though it might not be regulated, but they have access to good quality content. So I don't think it's been a challenge even in small towns also for students to make this shift. It's more of the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. They are the ones because of this change in a way are trying out or experiencing the advantages of online learning. Now, obviously, just like any new, when you are doing it for the first time, there will be teething issues, but it's just a matter of time before they all become better at it in terms of how they start using learning tools in school and kids using it at home. So we've always seen even like just when we looked at the data, more than 70% of our users, they actually come from outside the top 10 cities. So it's not like the other segments where early adopters are the tech savvy affluent class. For the middle class parents in small towns, this is because education is still the only way to make it big for all of them. So if you give them an opportunity to try out things, if they see value in it, it's easy to kind of hold on to their attention and where they continue spending they used to spend 2 to 3 days per week on the platform before. Now, because obviously they're all at home, they're spending almost every day and like 100 minutes per day is the engagement which we have seen over the last few weeks. So it's encouraging to see how students across,
what I'll do right now,
even small towns, getting on board and staying over there. Obviously, it's as you mentioned in a previous question, it's a big challenge to if you don't get the format right, it's like everybody talks about lower attention spans for the next generation, but you'll be surprised to know that we have seen similar completion percentage among 6 to 9-year-olds as much as 14 to 17-year-olds. And I think it's because for them, spending time on a screen is almost a primary habit. So if you can also create learning in their world of using, because it's very easy to make content come to life on a screen than a blackboard.
Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is take a quick break. When I come back, we'll zoom out, telescope to the post-pandemic era and ask this very distinguished group of people we have over here live on this brainstorm about what education could look like in the future. Because remember, schools, colleges, universities shut at this moment. When they'll reopen, nobody knows at this moment. So how do you prepare for the next year? And even going forward, Will there be a blended model? What form will that model take? And what are the kind of skills that may be hugely consequential for people to acquire to stay relevant in the post-pandemic era? So we'll build on that and a lot more when we come back with the second part of this Future of Education brainstorm. I hope you're enjoying this conversation, because you can't have as diverse and sharp insights as you're seeing on this program. We'll continue on the other side. Stay with us. We're back in 2. Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.